Nearly 24 hours after the Iowa caucuses started, the state's Democratic Party released its first wave of results. The delay came after what's being described as a coding error with a phone app used by more than 1,700 caucus sites to report results. With 62% of precincts reporting now, former South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg, or I should say current Mayor Pete Buttigieg, holds a narrow lead in the delegate count over Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, 26.9% to 25.1%. They are followed by Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren with about 18%, former Vice President Joe Biden with about 15%, and Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar with about 12%. No other candidate has double-digit support. John Yang reports on the reason for the delay and how the candidates responded.
The Democratic presidential campaign shifted to New Hampshire early this morning, even as the results of the Iowa caucuses remained a mystery.
When I left Iowa, I said it was too close to call, and it still is, but I feel good.
We had ourselves a night in Iowa. No one knows the results still.
Of course, we don't know the results yet. Minor problem.
Iowa party officials blamed the lengthy delay on a coding issue with the app-based system intended to speed up results reporting. They insisted the issue did not impact the ability to report data accurately.
We have been working day and night to make sure that these results are accurate. The one thing I will say is that the underlying data, the raw data, is secure. It was always secure. This was a coding error in one of the pieces on the back end, but the raw data, the data that has come in, is secure, and I can assure Iowans of that.
17, 18.
In the absence of official numbers last night, campaigns sought to define their performances on their own. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders.
When those results are announced, I have a good feeling we're going to be doing very, very well here in Iowa.
Former South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg.
So we don't know all the results, but we know by the time it's all said and done, Iowa, you have shocked the nation. Because by all indications, we are going on to New Hampshire victorious.
Former Vice President Joe Biden.
From our indications, it's going to be close. We're going to walk out of here with our share of delegates. We don't know exactly what it is yet, but we feel good about where we are.
The Sanders and Buttigieg campaigns released their own vote counts, and the Biden campaign slammed what it called considerable flaws and acute failures in the Iowa party system. President Trump, who handily won Iowa's Republican caucuses last night, called the Democratic contest an unmitigated disaster. The foul-up renewed questions about whether the Iowa caucuses should remain first in the nation. Des Moines business owner Amos Cooper caucused last night for Biden.
The nation is not going to continue to sit and accept a state that doesn't represent America and they can't even count the vote.
Others at this local coffee shop defended the state's role in the presidential nominating process.
Iowans are very knowledgeable about politics and follow candidates and are, even though we may not be a cross-section of every state, certainly, we still have well-educated people who are very interested in doing the best for the country.
In New Hampshire, the race goes on. Today, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren remained focused on beating President Trump.
The way I'm going to win is I'm going to unite our party, because we have to have a united party. We can't have a repeat of 2016.
We are going.
And Sanders is to hold an event tonight to respond to President Trump's State of the Union address. But former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg is keeping to his strategy of bypassing the early contests. Today, he was in Michigan, where the March primary is 1 week after the delegate-rich Super Tuesday. When Nevada Democrats caucus in about 3 weeks, they were planning to use the same app that Iowa used last night. But today they thought better of that and said they're changing vendors. Judy?
What a wild night and a day, John Yang. John, tell us, what are the candidates today saying about all this?
Well, as these numbers came out, both Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders declared victory. Looking at different sets of numbers, Sanders ballyhooed the fact that he had more people who went to the caucuses and stood up for him. But Buttigieg pointed out that he was leading in what matters in caucuses, the number of delegates he was assigned. But these are still preliminary numbers, and the final numbers won't be out for some time. Judy?
And John, what does that mean when you say some time? Because this is, what, 62% of the precincts?
And 62%, it's also hard to figure out where the outstanding vote is, and there's been no indication from the party about when the rest of the vote will come out.
All right, John Yang, staying in Des Moines. Thank you very much. And to tell us more about what happened and what these results mean, we're joined by David Yepsen. He's also in Des Moines. He's covered politics in Iowa for years. He's the host of Iowa Press on Iowa PBS. So, John Yepsen, as a veteran of covering politics in this state, what can you tell us about what went wrong inside the Iowa Democratic Party?
Well, it was an embarrassment is what occurred, and what went wrong is that the system that they had was too big and too complicated to work well. If you think about it, they're collecting 3 pieces of data from 160,000 people in 2,000 different places, and trying to assign it to 99 counties and statewide, and make some sense out of it, and it just imploded. And it's sad, because on a day when Iowa Democrats could be celebrating their elevation of an openly gay presidential candidate, they're bogged down in defending this process, which has been criticized for years. And what we saw yesterday may very well be the end of the process as we know it.
Well, I want to ask you about that and about Pete Buttigieg, but why was it so complicated? Who's at fault, or what's at fault here?
Well, I think it's a combination. I think the complexity of it, as we understand it, it might have been some of it was untested. They're going back and doing postmortems and stuff, but it just doesn't look good. I mean, somebody said if this were a third world country, we'd be calling for UN observers to look at our elections. You don't know where votes come from. You don't know how long it takes before they are reported. We live in an era when the public is skeptical of elections, fake news and conspiracy theories abound, and the party simply failed to have a good, clean, quick count that was unimpeachable.
David, you mentioned the victory in so many words of Pete Buttigieg. Is that how you read this? Because he is ahead in the so-called delegate equivalent count, but in terms of the raw numbers, I guess Bernie Sanders was ahead.
Yeah, both of them get bragging rights, and so I think that's fine. So far, they can claim a victory. I think, as I said, I think for what Pete Buttigieg has accomplished here, in a state that has been criticized for not being diverse, for being lily white, too old, rural, all of a sudden, a plurality of delegates appear to have supported the first openly gay candidate for the American presidency. That ought to be a big deal. Instead, they're sitting there mired in this mess over these counts.
Do these results and again, we've only got 62% of the precincts in, David Yepsen, do these results square with what you've seen around the state leading up to the caucuses? Did you see this kind of a result building?
Certainly was possible. Buttigieg had very good crowds. So did Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders had big crowds in a lot of certain areas like college towns. And this was why 4 years ago he wanted this body count taken, this initial preference, because he thought he had more people than Hillary Clinton did. And the same thing is happening here. But like the Electoral College, you've got to get votes in lots of different places in order to win delegates or electors.
Anything you want to add about how Elizabeth Warren or how Joe Biden did?
Yeah, this is bad news for Biden. And it explains why his campaign is complaining the loudest about the delegate count today. Fourth place. There's never been 4 tickets out of Iowa. This is not a good showing. Now, maybe it will change, and this is all tentative, as you've noted, at 62%. Maybe he does better in rural areas. But it's not very good news for Biden. This doesn't give him the momentum that he needs to raise desperately needed money to stay in this race.
And Elizabeth Warren?
I think this halts her slide. She had peaked at one point and then took some hits in debates. And so her campaign was really trying to get some momentum again. So third place, she lives to take the argument on to New Hampshire.
And just in a few seconds, I heard you say you do think this may be the end of the caucuses in Iowa?
Yes, I think the criticism all over the country is this is not a good way to do this. They should go to a primary system. I expect there will be a big discussion nationally in the Democratic National Committee, and I think there'll be a discussion in Iowa as well about whether this state shouldn't, in fact, go to a primary like most states.
David Yepsen, thank you very much.
Thank you.